Okay, so today we'll be telling you part 3 of my story of how I went blind. And for those of you who either weren't here or don't remember, part 1 and 2, where we left off on part 2 is I had basically just got off the life flight helicopter and got into surgery, but I didn't really go into the surgery that much, so just to give you a little bit of insight here, actually. Watch out, Bruce. Right there. Okay. And then I'll put the pick in my pocket. Okay, so that's a pint-sized jar. And just for a little insight, me and Mom looked it up with a calculator thing. When I was shot, I had 8.24 pints of blood in me, so I had 8 1/4 of these in my body. I lost 6 units, so I had to have 6 of these put back into me for transfusions. So I had lost 3/4 of the blood in my body, and they had to give back 3/4 of blood. So,
and you kept going into
respiratory failure 4 times, acute respiratory failure, which is...
Well, I think it was more than 4 times, actually. The first time you were intubated was when you got to the ambulance. And they said you were standing, but you were getting incoherent. And about the time that you stopped remembering is about the time that they started intubating you in the ambulance, waiting for life flight. In the ambulance, they said it was very difficult to intubate you because of the swelling in your throat and the amount of blood. And then once on life flight, you continued to go into respiratory failure. So you did as well once you got to the hospital. So that first day, you went in and out of respiratory failure.
Which is where
constantly.
You effectively stop breathing and they have to do the chest compressions.
Even being ventilated and, intubated and ventilated.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's where, like, I start flatlining, or not where I start, I am flatlining. They're like, we got, chest compressions until I start breathing again.
Yeah, your blood pressure was something like 63/48.
And what's normal?
Well, 120/80.
Yeah.
It is,
So I had half.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into the story. So we get to the hospital, and they got the gurney sitting there waiting for me. They touch down, they get me out, and they rush me into the OR. For those of you who don't know, that's the operating room. And the ocularist, so the eye surgeon, and the neurosurgeon, so the brain surgeon, were both in there waiting for me. And the neurosurgeon,
there were probably 4 other surgeons in the room at the same time.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, the 2 main ones.
Right.
So the 2 main ones, Michaels and Carlson. Carlson was the neurosurgeon, and Michaels was the ocularist. Like I said in part 2, they were both the best surgeons that Sacred Heart has, and it was both of their days off, and yet they were in the hospital on unrelated reasons. And they were there to receive me. So they received me. I'm in the OR room, and there was about a hand-sized portion of scalp and skull missing. So, about that much. As I showed you in the part 2 with my skull 3D print. So, and then the right frontal lobe. So that's about what your brain size is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about like that, right? Now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a decent amount of that brain got blown off. So your frontal lobe would be right about there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that basically all got blown off, and he just cut basically the rest of it off, cleaning up all the contaminated and damaged pieces. And your parietal lobe's right there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's got a good chunk of it. So that's about what it would look like. It's like, so normal would be like that, but it's more like that. It's all, yeah. But so anyway, and we'll probably throw in a couple pictures of the CAT scan. But so he cuts off and cleans up some of the parietal and most of the right frontal lobe. The right frontal lobe controls motor skills and, like, speech, correct? It's like
Well, most of the speech is in the parietal.
Well, I mean, like, moving of the lips and, like, motor skills. So, like, moving, muscle movements, all that. So...
Well, and decision making, personality.
Anyway, so, and then the parietal, what would you say it is? Like, speech and all that?
Well, the speech center is in the parietal lobe.
Okay, so yeah, the speech center is in the parietal lobe. But, so I lost a good portion of that and almost all of the right frontal lobe. So, and so, what would you say? 4 hours of surgery?
Something like that. Maybe a little longer. It was a long
Or
day.
maybe 4.5 hours of surgery. And the chaplain, which they always have a chaplain come in to tell either your child or family member is in really serious, like a very serious condition, or they're dead.
Well, they come in to pray with you.
Come in to pray with you, yeah, but like that's like, you know that it's serious when you see the chaplain coming in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You know it's serious when you get hit by a gun. You know it's serious when your life, flown
Yeah, yeah.
to the ER. I mean, it was.
Well, I mean,
it was a pretty serious situation.
Yeah, I know. But so anyway, the chaplain comes in and it was either my mom or my dad, but one of them was just like, "No, I can't hear any of this right now," Right?
Are you skipping to the next morning?
No, I'm just telling the story.
Okay.
I might jump around a little bit. I don't know. I don't have the correct timeline entirely. Okay. But so anyway, they come out. Oh, right, the oculars. So Michaels comes out and he just flat tells my parents, he's like, so your boy's gonna live, but we can't save his eyes. Just flat out said it. We're not gonna be able to save his eyes. And so at that point, my mom and dad either weren't ready to, or they couldn't accept it, or what, but they didn't want my eyes removed yet. So they made the decision not to have my eyes removed, but the ocularist was saying, no, we should remove them. They'll just keep on causing problems until, in a very short amount of time, about, like a week or so, maybe, they would explode, basically. They'd build up too much pressure, they'd get infected, they'd explode, basically.
Well, yeah, one of them was already
Yeah.
had leaked out all its contents. I read the surgery reports. There was very little recognizable matter on the right eye, and the pupil of your left eye was non-responsive, and it was just.
They said it basically looked like if you took a grape, squashed all of the contents out, like squeezed it really hard, or basically if you
Let's not get too graphic.
Well, it's a grape, Mom.
It's like Shrek.
It's like if you took a grape, popped it in your mouth, chewed a couple times, and spit it out.
Right.
So that's about what my eyes looked like.
And we just lost half your listeners right there. Anyway, the eyes were not savable.
Would you like me to tell about the grape jelly throat?
No, okay. Please don't.
Okay.
Anyway, so Jade's correct. His dad and I decided that we were not ready to have his eyes removed. First of all, it was just very shocking to hear. At that point, I had just gotten to the hospital. And I did not know where he'd been shot even at this point.
Didn't know what I'd been shot with.
Yeah, I didn't know who shot him. All I knew was that he was shot. So it was a very long 1.5-hour drive to the hospital.
Full of wonder and,
dread.
Mm-hmm.
But.
And so when the doctor came out and said we're not going to save his eyes.
That was when it first hit me that he had actually even been shot. So I actually looked across the table at Jade's dad, and I'm going to start crying as I tell it. But anyway, I was like, what do you mean his eyes? Where was he shot? And anyway, the look on Mike's face was pretty horrific.
Mike's my dad, by the way.
Yeah. And then I realized that Jade had been shot in the head, and I asked, what was he shot with? He said a 12 gauge, and then, of course, I was just like, oh my God, who shot him? And finding out that it was actually my middle son, Jade's older brother, not oldest. There are three boys.
Dakota, he's the one that you see in our videos every now and then.
And anyway, it was a very difficult situation. Anyway, we were not ready to have his eyes removed, so they went ahead and closed up the. They had already done a craniectomy, and oh gosh, the list goes on and on and on.
We have 300 pages or so
Like-
of chart notes.
All these are Jade's hospital notes, and
Oh,
I was
that's
putting them together to read some of them, and it's
2.5 hours.
too hard.
We just
to
spent
do.
2.5 hours today, about 5 different tries on the video, trying to get it all set up until we just finally decided, no, we're not going to say all the surgery reports and stuff. So, that's just a little insight of the time it takes. But so anyway, and it was all for nothing because we decided to.
Well, for
exclude
nothing,
it.
but I will show like this, the first surgery, there was a lot. There was a lot of stuff in his brain and his face that had to be repaired.
And so, they, do the surgery. Like I said, about 4.5 or so hours. There was, 6 surgeries in the first initial, surgery? There's, 6 separate ones, correct?
Something like that.
And what I mean by 6 different ones, there was, one for one lobe, one for the other lobe, so there's 2, and then one per each eye, so there's 4.
No, they don't really count it like that. They just
Or-
had so many things to do, but there were between 4 and 6 surgeons in and out working on different things. Because they had to work fairly quickly because, like you said, you lost.
Oh, right. Actually, that was in
quarters of your blood.
that was in the other video. So, that's a pint. That's a pint-sized jar. Me and my mom looked it up in a blood calculator thing for my size. When I was shot, I had 8.24 units, aka pints of blood in my body. So 8.25. I lost 6. So there was 8.25 of these of blood in my body. I lost 6 of them. I only had 2.25 of them left, so they had to give me 6 of these back in blood. Anyway, and so, like Mom said, I also went into respiratory failure multiple times, which is where you're dying.
You just quit breathing.
Quit breathing. You completely stop breathing. They have to do the chest compressions, all that. And I was on a ventilator and intubation tubes, even while I was having respiratory failure, acute respiratory failure. So,
What's the first thing you remember after
Right.
surgery?
So, 12 hours after I was shot, I was done with the surgery. They put me in a medically induced coma. I was supposed to be, well, first off, I had lost basically my entire right frontal lobe, so just in that case, I never should have moved or anything ever again. I should have been a vegetable for the rest of my life. If I lived, that is. And then on top of that, I was supposed to be under a chemically induced coma for 7 days, so even if I had full capabilities of moving and everything, which I do, I was still supposed to be a vegetable for 7 days, basically.
Well, and that's that morning. So the team of surgeons came in and they were kind of doing a briefing with your dad and I.
Yeah, and that's
And
what
your
they were
dad
saying.
was standing on the right-hand side of your
I
bed.
thought he was on my left.
No, he was on your right. I was on your left.
Oh.
And they came in, and it was early morning, like 6 a.m., something like that.
Yeah, so I was
And
shot around
Jade was all
noon.
bandaged up, and they were explaining to me that he was going to be in a medically induced coma for 6-7 days, and then they started just kind of talking doctor talk, if he survives, blah blah blah. I hate to say it like that, but it got to a point where I just couldn't hear anymore of hearing how much damage there was in Jade's brain and what the outcome potentially was going to be like. And they did mention that there was a potential of severe brain damage, possible paralysis, just all sorts of lifelong disabilities. And I just turned my face away from them for a moment. I said, I'm sorry, I can't hear any more of this. And I had been holding Jade's left hand, so I reached down. I had been holding his hand anyway. But I leaned down and I said, Peanut, I love you so much. And Peanut has been his nickname since the moment he was born. And so when I said that, he squeezed my hand. And when he squeezed my hand, of course, I was super excited, and I told the surgeon standing there, I said, "Oh my gosh, he just
Can I tell this
squeezed my
part?
hand."
Can I tell this part?
Yeah, you can tell this part.
I just like proving doctors wrong and stuff.
Okay.
Okay, so, yeah, Mom leans over. She says, "I love you so much, Peanut." And then I squeezed her hand. And she's like, "He just squeezed my hand." And they're sitting over there like, "No, no, impossible. That, like, you're just imagining that." At this point, they're not even thinking it could have been a reflex because all the drugs and because of the loss of the motor skills part of my brain. So at that point, they're just like, "No, you just imagined it." And they're like, "No, Mom." My mom's like, "No, he just squeezed my hand." They're like, "No, impossible." And she's like, "Jade, if you can hear me, nod your head." So I nod my head.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the doctors see that, and they're all like, "Wait,
What?
did we just see that, or no? There's no way we saw that." And so Mom kind of gives them a little bit of a stank eye.
No, I didn't.
I like to imagine that you did. Anyway, and so she's like, "Jade, if you can hear me, wiggle your big left toe." So I wiggle my big left toe, and then the neurosurgeon, Dr. Carlson's like, "If you can hear me, wiggle your big right toe." And so I wiggle my big right toe.
Then he had you squeeze his hand.
And then I squeezed his hand. And then wiggle each one of my fingers individually, which right now, it's not hard at all, But, like, you have to understand that I just was shot 12 hours ago, and it was actually, like, insanely hard. Like, it gave me an excruciating headache just to wiggle my thumb and stuff. And so I did everything they told me to, and at this point the doctors are in tears. They're in tears. And so the neurosurgeon Carlson was saying how he's been doing this for 20 years. He's seen some of the most, like, just awful stuff you can imagine, and never seen anything like this ever.
He said it was absolutely unprecedented.
Unprecedented, which means
It just
unrecorded, never happened. And so,
for the extent of damage to your brain and face, and what you went through, the fact that you not only could hear but respond, even on the incredible doses of medications you were on, was pretty astounding.
But so anyway, and then, let's see. At that point, I'm not sure if they left the room, but I know for sure that I just kind of stopped remembering there. I'm pretty sure I fell asleep. So yeah, I fell asleep almost immediately after they finished with their wiggle your finger, toe, all that, And I couldn't talk or anything because my mouth was jammed full of intubation tubes, all that. I had the tube going into my nose, giving me extra oxygen, everything. And if you go
You
back...
had a feeding tube as well.
Feeding tube? Thought I just was on a PICC line. Well, anyway. So, and then I had, like, however many IVs in each arm. Then I had a PICC line going in right next to my groin, straight into my femoral artery? Or was it a vein?
I think so.
Well, I can still find the scar. It's, like, right there.
I know, but I don't remember all that.
Well, still, I even have the PICC line up at Dad's house. It's in one of my drawers.
It's not surprising.
No. Honestly, it kind of freaked me out when I first felt it. I was like, ugh! Kind of like when I felt my skull. But so anyway, yeah, so I was on a bunch of IVs, PICC lines, or not PICC lines, but PICC line. And I still don't really know what PICC line means or whatever, but it's like a really big IV that goes straight into a huge artery that, like, is supposed to feed you and give you, like, liquids and all that stuff.
Well, during that whole day, you kept trying to grab at your
I kept on grabbing at the tube.
You wanted it out?
I didn't even know it was in there. Like, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know where it was. I didn't know, like, all that. But, so I just kept on grabbing at it and, like, pulling at it, but they kept on, like, putting it back in. And it got to the point where they finally taped it in. And so here's what I was thinking. So I had a bunch of dried blood all over my face. So I just, like, I didn't really know what I was doing. I just would, like, scratch it off, pick all the dried blood off. And when I felt that tape, I thought it was more dried blood. But I didn't know it was dried blood at that point because I didn't really know what had happened. And so I, like, started, like, peeling at the tape, but it kept on pulling at my hair, so I'd like stop, go back to it, stop, go back to it, and just keep on doing that. And so I, kind of impossible for the doctors because they thought they could just walk away from me and I'd be good.
Mm-mm.
But then I'd just basically.
Well, and you
Yeah.
kept pulling at it. And so
Pulling
we
out
had
it.
discussed pulling at it, yeah. We had discussed by the next morning because you wouldn't leave it alone. And you were pretty irritated with it, is what it appeared to be. And so we decided on the second day that we would try to extubate you. And we did. They did. And your dad and
That
I.
was awful.
Well,
I remember getting extubated.
right. I think part of the reason you were having such a hard time with it in there is because as soon as they pulled that out and he was able to sit up, all that dried blood.
It wasn't even dried. It was
coagulated. Yeah, it literally, not to be totally gross, but it was like 3 pints full of grape jelly just coming out. He was throwing up, and so that's probably why you kept wanting to get that out of your mouth, is because all that dried blood wanted to come out of your stomach and your throat and your lungs.
My mom thought I was dying right there in front of her when I was throwing all that up, right?
Yeah, that was probably the hardest part for me. I mean, and it's unfortunate your dad saw you after the accident. I didn't see you until you were bandaged up, and so that was the first time when they took off all the bandages and took the tube out that I actually saw what you looked like for the first time. And yeah, it was pretty traumatic. But anyway, so for about an hour and 20 minutes, his dad and I sat next to him.
The most annoying hour and 20 minutes of my entire life. They sat, both of them holding one of my hands. I was laying down. All I wanted to do was go to sleep, take a nap, and just zone out. But no, every 2 or 3 seconds for an hour and 20 minutes.
Take a breath, Jade.
Take a breath, Jade.
Come on,
take
breathe.
a breath, Jade. Breathe, breathe. Take a breath. Then I'd take a breath. And then I'd exhale, and I'd be like, okay, can you guys just leave me alone? Take a breath, take a breath, take a breath! And then just over and over and over and over and
it took about an hour and 20 minutes until Jade was breathing on his own without a reminder.
Yeah, remembered to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But it was pretty fascinating for him being all bandaged up and not being able to see anything. Even within 48 hours, he would just automatically know who his nurse in PICU was. He would remember shift changes. The third morning, early in the morning, Mike and I would take shifts, and it was my turn to sit in there with him, and Jade motioned, "Mom, come here." And he was only whispering because his throat hurt so bad, and it hurt his head to talk.
We could maybe add in some of those videos of me talking, and it literally just sounded like...
Yeah, he was pretty quiet. I've got a bunch of those. Anyway.
That was as loud as I could go. I literally tried to yell, and literally all I could do was...
Yeah. So
continue.
He motions towards his face, and he asks me, "Mom, what is this?" And he had a bunch of cerebral spinal fluid draining out from, the head wound and out of his eyes and everything. And so I was explaining to him, I was trying to orient him. Well, Jade, you've been shot, and all of this. And he turns his head slightly towards me, and he says, "No beep." So SHIT. "What color is it?" he asks. And
because I had heard my nurse and neurosurgeon talking earlier. The
in the middle of the night
was saying how if the cerebral spinal fluid turns any yellower, notify him immediately.
Yeah.
So Mom was going on the super long-winded thing, and I was sitting there like, what color is it? And she's like, "Oh, it's yellow." I was like, okay. And then
he calls out to his PICU nurse, Cody.
Yeah.
And he's all, "Remember, if it gets any yellower, you need to call the doctor immediately." And by that day, he was already like suctioning his own mouth out, and
oh, that tasted horrible.
He wanted to
eat. Coagulated blood and everything.
Yeah, he wanted to eat that day. So
Uncle
Ben actually.
Oh yeah,
your dad's brother
sprouts,
made you your favorite meal of Brussels sprouts with browned butter and garlic, which he made from the
Ronald McDonald House.
Yeah, they were staying at the McDonald house.
Anybody who is at McDonald's and they see like donations for the Ronald McDonald House, you don't have to, but it'd actually be really cool if you did, because what the Ronald McDonald House does is they house families who, like for instance, my dad and brother and stepmom stayed in there for, how long did they stay in there?
For
For
2 weeks.
2 weeks while I was in the hospital. They let them stay in there free of charge, right?
Yeah.
And so they
and
didn't
there's
have to.
food there and
They had
housing.
food. There was multiple different people there. So and they all were in the same position. So Ronald McDonald House is actually a really cool
resource.
So
It was
anybody,
very
you should
I would just sleep in Jade's room.
Yeah, she'd sleep in my room, and because if I felt like I was alone for any period of time, I'd just freak out. And I was on so many painkillers and different kinds of painkillers that made me hallucinate. I just the most vivid nightmares ever. Like for instance, one of them was I thought that. Well, for instance, that previous week, just a couple days before, I was on a job site and we had a scissor lift, and I would go up on the scissor lift every now and then and like do stuff like put up tongue and groove on the walls, stuff like that, sand down high spots, all that on sheetrock, all that. And so I